What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? Today we have a man down in the shop. This metabo grinder, which I've had for a long time, is in the category of work no more, and we're going to see if we can fix it, which I think the answer is no, we're not going to be able to, but we'll at least be able to see the insides of this and see why it failed. So let's get into it. So I've owned this grinder for 6 or 7 years, and I've used it literally for everything. I actually used this thing for about 3 years of doing tuck pointing on an old building I used to own. So this thing has seen quite a diet of concrete and mortar dust along with metal working, and this is, I don't know, the longest I've ever had a grinder that actually survived. So the fact that this doesn't work properly anymore isn't really too much of a surprise to me, I guess. Now, on that note, it actually does power up and spin. The issue is not with the motor. The issue with this thing is it has an internal clutch that's designed to trip under a heavy load, aka you're using a cutoff wheel without the guard in a manner you shouldn't, and the wheel catches something like an exhaust pipe, and this tries to blow out of your hands and kill you. Well, they put a clutch in this that will slip, and it prevents this thing from, blowing off like a chainsaw into a tree. So that's a good thing. The problem is that the clutch in this, however it's designed, is wore out, and I can't even barely use a wire wheel or put any force on it, and it just slips and produces a tremendous amount of heat. So, this thing is pretty much useless now. Which, well, what are we going to do to fix it? I don't think we're going to be able to do anything, because I don't think metabo sells parts for these. I'll be honest with you guys, I'm not exactly sure how the clutch in here works. We're going to find out when we disassemble it. I kind of wonder if the clutch isn't on the output side of the bevel gear that's in here. I don't know that they would put it inside between the motor and the gearbox, but maybe they did. Hard to say on that. We'll figure out as we take it apart. And I gotta say that the clutch system in here honestly is one of the few safety features I've ever found in a tool that actually I would borderline say is useful and a positive, because this thing pretty much would trip anytime the cutoff disc or whatever was ready to catch. It never had a problem with grinding discs at all. So this thing was very reliable. And there were more than a few times that it prevented a major kickback, so that's all a positive thing. I don't see the safety mechanism in here eventually failing as a negative or a reason why you shouldn't get this, because this outlasted any other grinder I've had. Well, let me go grab a couple more tools and let's start getting this thing apart. Not as much grease in here as I would have suspected, and it's looking pretty gnarly in there. Just looks like mud, so that's likely metal dust and you name it mixed with that. I'm not sure if this is the clutch assembly in here or not, because the motor appears to be hooked directly to this pinion here, and I don't see a clutch, so it very well might be inside of this somehow, like this piece right here. I'll have to do some tests. Well, let me get this thing cleaned up. So I looked at the grinder body itself, and I don't believe there's any clutch mechanism in that. I believe the clutch is self-contained in this unit here, which is kind of an interesting thought. Now, what I did is I chucked it up here in a vise to where it's grabbing the shaft hard, and the shaft won't turn. And I'm going to see if I can spin this ring gear. Oh yeah, actually I can do it by hand. I brought a screwdriver to do it, and you can see, yeah, this clutch in here is just smoked. I can spin the ring gear right on it, and there's not enough clamping force on it. Now, this could be due to a number of reasons. This appears to have like a sintered metal washer or end cap on it, and that likely was heated up and then pressed hot on here, and then it shrunk holding this. Well, if this is backed up at all, you're going to lose the pressure here. Unfortunately, I can't easily remove this because it's a shrink fit. So I guarantee you I'm going to damage everything if I try and pull this off, and I don't think that I could even get a replacement for this. So we're kind of SOL on this. So what I'm going to do in an attempt to repair this, I'm going to take this over to the shop press, find something that slips over this, and I'm going to put some downward pressure onto this to see if I can't get some more preload on this clutch here. So I got this set up in the press, and I put just a little bit of pressure on this socket to get it centered, and it didn't quite fit on there. It was a little bit too small, and then it popped over, and now it's probably stuck on there because I'm an idiot. But we'll find a way to get that off. So let me put a little pressure on this and see if we can't push this down a little bit. It moved. It definitely slid down quite a bit. We're only at about, I don't know, 1.5 tons maybe. Let me loosen this up and go chuck it back in the vise and see if this gear spins. Well, the gear does not spin. Let me see if I can't knock this off. All right, well, that tightened her up a little bit. I'm kind of surprised that worked. I kind of marred up that from the socket like an idiot, but you know what? It definitely doesn't slip as much. Let me see if I can get it to spin with the screwdriver. Yeah, it has just a little bit of slip to it, but a lot more force. Well, we may have actually fixed this. Well, that's no good. I wasn't planning on being able to fix this. So let's take apart more of it to see if we can't solve that issue. I've never seen the inside of one of these before, so why not try and take it apart even further? So I ended up splitting this all apart so we can see what's inside of here and get an opinion on whether or not this is built decent. And this is a interesting setup here. So this is all like sealed in epoxy, and I noticed the epoxy is cracked in multiple places and there's dents and things. It's pretty beat up, which I would say is from ingesting dust, mainly concrete dust and mortar dust likely got in here and just beat the living daylights out of it. I don't know that much about electric motors, so if you see anything unusual or you'd like to add on this, you can feel free as we're going. Just leave it in the comments, obviously. I believe that these slots are put in there to balance this assembly. That's a great sign that they didn't just slap this together and call it good. They actually tried to balance it. This commutator, I believe is a term for this, doesn't appear to be worn as much as I would have thought it would have been, but the brush itself that runs on this is what should be wearing more so than this. And I gotta be honest, guys, I'm willing to bet the brushes have no life left in them because this thing is eating dust like you wouldn't believe. But it's not scored. If worst cases, if it needs a set of brushes, I might actually order it for this since that clutch seems to be fixed. But there's a bearing, a pretty big bearing, it appears, back in here, maybe. Yeah, there must be a bearing, and then there's a ducted fan in here. Seems to spin a little bit freely without pressure on this assembly. It's kind of rubbing the plastic there, the fan is, but that's not really a big deal because under pressure, oh, there you go, you can see it a little bit better. Appears to be a pretty big bearing in there. There is some slop in it, but again, the tail bearing on this isn't being held right now. So that's probably why. Cute little tail bearing here. That seems to be in good shape, no real issue there. sealed bearing. Interestingly enough, in here as well, that's actually a needle bearing in there. I thought that was a bushing. It's actually needle bearing. And believe it or not, the worst grinder I've ever used was a, well, now it's Metabo HPT, but it was a Hitachi power tool grinder. And it had a bushing in there, and I'm not joking. That bushing lasted maybe 3 hours worth of grinding on mortar before the thing failed, and then it would vibrate everything because it was so wallered out in there that this whole assembly, even with a bearing here, would just wobble. So this thing, much beefier than what I saw in that. It's too bad that Metabo bought out Hitachi, because I don't know, I never really thought their tools were any good, at least the more recent ones. Well, a moment of truth. Let's look at this sad, sorry son of a gun. You can see the amount of mortar dust in here. Not looking too good. The brushes appear to be non-existent. I was correct in my assumption. Well, actually, there's more brush left than I would have thought. I thought that the wire came in like here and it was wore like 90% of the way through. But there's actual life left on this. That's a shocker. I'll check this other one as well. It just, you see how big this brush holder is? Like it goes in there like almost a ½ inch. I thought that the brush was that long, and maybe it was at one time. But there's still quite a bit of life left on it. Yeah, maybe these were a lot longer. Hard to say on that. But yeah, screw it. I'm not ordering a replacement set. Well, what I need to do now, since I don't even have any grease for this gearbox on this sucker, I'm going to go to the store, pick up some grease, and I'm going to pick up some electronics cleaner and clean this crap out of here. I mean, there's sticks in here, mortar dust. It's pretty ugly looking. And if this thing is going to last any kind of longer time than what it has, I definitely need to clean some of this out at least. Be back in a jiffy. Like that property tax bill you don't want to pay, I'm back. So I got some electric parts cleaner. Honestly, I could have just used brake clean on this and it would have done pretty much the same thing. And I did get some actual brake clean to clean inside the bevel box. So let me just spray this sucker down to clean some of this crap out. So you're probably asking yourself, why are we back here? And that's because, well, I got everything over there all cleaned up, and then I sprayed this with cleaner and it started slipping even more. And look at this, completely loose in there once I got all the crap sprayed out of this clutch mechanism. So I got to looking at this and realized that this is not a press fit. I had pressed this down, it likely locked up because of all the debris in there, and I thought it was fixed because it had some slippage, but man, it took some force. Well, this is actually a nut that is threaded on this shaft. So we're going to take this apart and see if we can't look at the clutch assembly and actually fix it, because this is NFG. Look at that little nut, huh? Well, I better take this to the bench and get these washers set in a proper order. So we got some normal washers that are all domed out. Appears we got a metal shim here. Oh, another domed washer. Ooh, a lot of crap in there. Oh, look at that. Interesting. I'll have to get some more paper towels and clean all this crap out of here. I was able to take this all the way apart with that nut off, and this washer more or less goes here. It interfaces with the bevel gear on the back, so there's no like clutch material in here. And then this piece more or less gets pressed together to prevent slipping, and it actually doesn't take that much pressure in order to have this somewhat get stiff and lock up. So these washers, we have a shim, and then we have washers that are more or less spring washers that are designed to put pressure. And I'm kind of confused as to why they use so many. Clearly that was to get enough pressure on this. My guess is part of what we got going on here is that these washers are just probably wore out. I mean, they actually look like they have different levels of dome to them. So my guess is that's probably what's going on. Yeah, this guy's pretty flat in comparison to the others. So that's likely what happened, is it lost the pressure on this downward to keep this clutch from slipping. And by a clutch, it's basically just metal on metal. Now, I looked up this assembly online, and it's 90 or 100 bucks. Well, I can get a whole new grinder for not a whole lot more money than that. So it's kind of pointless in buying this gearbox. So we're going to do a backyard fix on this, and that's going to be to use extra shims of some sort to get more pressure, because I tighten this nut down, and what's going on is the nut all the way tight doesn't put enough pressure on here. So if I can go and find a washer that slip fits basically the same size as this, I can get some extra clearance taken up, therefore more pressure put on this. But to start things off, I'm going to reassemble this and just kind of look at how much slip it has to get an idea of how thick of a washer that I need. Well, a second trip to the hardware store, hopefully I have enough stuff to put this back together and make it work. Now, I did some investigation on this by looking at the design, and I found some interesting things, and I'm not quite sure what to think of. And I made a little chart here. So let's take a look at this. So here I have a diagram of the bevel gear and the washer assembly. Here's the bevel gear, and then this is the backing plate, that's the front plate. There's a couple interesting details about this. So there's a machined or raised lip on both pieces here, and more or less the pressure of these two pieces squeezing on the bevel gear is what works as a clutch. Now, I don't really understand why, but this raised circle here is actually offset from the center line of this. So if this is a center line, it's actually offset. Now, maybe somehow that increases friction. I'm not exactly sure. Now, the front part here, it has no appreciable wear at all. This inner part here is a little bit polished, but that's it. So no wear. The back side, I'm not exactly sure, but you can see there's like a raised lip that may actually be wear from this backing plate wearing into there. Now, I'm not positive on that. This is the only metabo I've ever opened up, so I'm not exactly sure. But there's no appreciable wear on this either, so I don't know, I'm thinking that's factory, but I find that odd. Now, this whole mechanism works by the clamping pressure on these two on the bevel gear to provide enough friction to where it doesn't slip except under high torque, like your wheels jammed in something like your leg. So I find it interesting how this thing was just slipping. It means one of two things. The preload washers, that's part of the shaft system that squeezes, that they're wore out, aka they're flattened, which one of them looks a little bit flat, but with those flat, you're going to lose the preload on this assembly, and then it's going to slip. The other possibility is that this bevel gear right here is actually indeed wore into, as well as these raised sections are wore, and the clearance, or more or less the size loss on that, the thickness loss, makes this assembly slip because we no longer have our preload. I tried changing the way that those washers for preload over here go, multiple different ways to try and gain preload, and no way can I get it to tighten to where the gear doesn't slip. So I'm really thinking a lot of it is the wear in here that's causing this. Now, I can make this assembly work. The problem is I don't know at what torque level this gear is supposed to slip. So it will likely not work the same as when it was new. And it may not slip at all, or it may slip too much. The other thing I'm a little bit concerned about, and let me show you. The distance that this bevel gear is from this is absolutely critical, because it has to interface with this pinion in here. Well, if this wears into this at all, it's now going to have excessive backlash between the pinion and this bevel gear, which is going to result in weak tooth engagement and likely broken teeth or excessive wear. Now, let's face it, guys, this thing is junk anyways. If I wouldn't be fixing it now, it would basically go in the junk bin anyways. So I guess whatever longevity we can get out of it is better than zero. So that's good. But I have a feeling that if the wear is the issue as to what's going on here, we're going to be in a bit of a pickle for any kind of future longevity. And just looking at this, it appears as though the tooth engagement is pretty high on this. Is that end of the world? Not really. I mean, this isn't like a rear axle in a car, and it's a straight cut gear on this bevel. It's not like helical or whatever you call it, where the teeth are angled. So I think, honestly, I don't know, I think this will be fine if we just tighten up this assembly and get it to where it slips less. So the first thing I'm going to try and do to solve that, I couldn't find a ball bearing, but I found this little nut here, and I'm going to take the shop press, put this on, and I'm going to compress the washer while it's supported on the outside to see if I can't more or less put more of an angle on this. Well, with those washers redomed, I put the shims in it and everything, tightened it down, and the bevel gear no longer slips. So that definitely took care of it. The problem with this is over time, I'm sure the same thing is going to happen where these are going to lose the preload. In order to permanently solve this, what you could do is just put a washer stack with shims or something in here and just completely eliminate the preload to where it's just tight. And with it tight where this assembly won't slip much, it will work like any other grinder. It just loses a safety clutch, which, I mean, I guess that's better than throwing it in the garbage, in my opinion. But that's what appeared to be the problem with this. And like I said, the preload works the way it should. I can't spin it by hand anymore. So I think it's time to reassemble everything. And by the way, you forgot to tell me I left this piece of junk up. So I got to disassemble this, throw that in, put some grease in here and reassemble it, and we'll go to conclusion. Well, I got this sucker back together. I ended up using this stuff, synthetic 220, I don't know, blue schmoo. I don't know, it's what I had laying around. So as a gearbox grease, seems to work. This thing's real quiet. One thing I've always liked with the metabo grinders is how smooth they run, even with a wire wheel, very well balanced. Well, let's see if this thing trips out the clutch trying to smooth out anything. Nope, clutch is not slipping when it shouldn't, so I would say that this is at least a temporary repair, and if it slips again, I'm just going to take all the clearance out of it and rigidly tighten that to where it no longer slips, because grinders are so expensive now, it pays to not throw them out per se. So in conclusion, what did we learn today? Well, I learned a few things. One, sorry about the audio quality. It's like 98 degrees in here, and I guess my brain's just cooked and I had the microphone setting far too high, so sorry about that. So I learned always check the microphone setting. As far as fixing tools, well, I learned that something like this can be at least temporarily fixed, but unfortunately, an engineering problem is far harder to fix permanently. And I wouldn't call this an engineering problem, I guess. It's just wear and tear items, and unfortunately, I don't think they sell those washers separate. So to get the proper preload back again, we had to resort to unconventional methods using this guy to redome those washers. Now, a ball bearing would have worked a lot better, and that's what I should have used, but hey, I didn't have one. Will the fix be permanent? Probably not, but at least we learned something. We learned enough to where we could make it a permanent fix if that's what it comes down to. But beyond that, I really do like these grinders. They've proven to last a very long time for me, and this is the first time I've ever had an issue with any of them. So I'm not too surprised at some point I did. I definitely would recommend picking one of these brand up. They're so smooth and they last. I mean, let's face it, they last. Now, it goes without saying that, you know, rather than throwing stuff out, maybe you should give a try at repairing it. Does it mean that you're gonna repair it or that something is repairable? Absolutely not. But hey, a little bit of attempt goes a long way, because why toss crap out if you can possibly fix it? And unconventional repair methods might actually come to your rescue and save you buying a $150 or $60 tool. So all things to consider. Again, thanks for sticking around for the video. Until next time.